drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had.
Life sucks. When you forget to turn your mic on, life sucks, and everyone laughs at you, life sucks. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I just was, and let me tell you, when that happens, life sucks. But have you been there before in a moment where you've been like, legitimately, life sucks? And I know that like this is the new year and we're supposed to be getting off on the right foot, and here we are talking through a series called Life Sucks. But I want to talk to you about some real talk. I want to talk about the real issues in life. I want to tell you about those moments where you stop and you say, man, my life just sucks. Sometimes it's the smaller things in life. You know, when you have your favorite cup and you just drop it and it shatters. And as the shards of glass sprinkle across the floor, it might as well be just shards of your life breaking apart in front of you, because that is the only cup that you like to drink from, ever. And you're like, oh man, or it's someone else's cup. You're at someone else's house, the first time you're visiting someone's house and you break something. Or maybe it's something a little harder, a little bit more tragic, a little more impactful, like you said something in anger to your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your family member, and now you just can't take it back. When you're driving along on the Anthony Henday or on the white mud and you don't realize that the white mud ended and now you're in 50-kilometer-an-hour traffic, and now you can see the flickering of red and blue lights behind you as the police are pulling you over. And you know that now you can't afford to go back to school next fall because you have a $250 speeding ticket. And now you're a few demerits away from losing your license altogether. Although I heard recently that they got rid of the graduated program, so you have like full demerits, and you don't have to deal with that. If you're new to driving, you don't have to deal with the persecution of the graduated license program and the fear of losing your license after one small speeding ticket. Let me tell you, you are lucky, because I lived in deep fear for a long time. Got one ticket, and every time I saw a light change behind me, it was like, oh, is that a police officer? No, it's like, just relax, they're not hunting you, but they were. They were. I was one ticket away. I was a good man, and I was one ticket away from losing my license. That doesn't play well. I'm not gonna put that in my dating bio. I'm not gonna put that in my Instagram bio. I don't want people to know that. There was constant fear about that. Or when you get a phone call and there's a loved one who's really hurt, or there's a horrible diagnosis, someone is dying, somebody is in danger, somebody broke up with somebody else, life is falling apart for somebody. When life truly starts to fall apart, do you ever just feel like life sucks? You failed school, you got dumped, somebody betrayed you, somebody hurt you, you hurt somebody else. You're trapped in the emotions of what has happened. You're trapped in the circumstances of your life, and it just is spiraling down, and you can't do anything about it, or at least it feels that way. And you realize, I am what I am who I am, and I've made these mistakes, and there is no way out. My life stinking sucks. I was dealt a bad hand. It's not my fault, but everything's fallen apart. It's not my fault that I was born in the family I was in. It's not my fault that this happened. It's not my fault, but it is happening, and life sucks. So we're starting off this series called Life Sucks. And tonight I want to talk to you about the first person in the Bible who encountered a series of events or a circumstance where he would have looked or she would have looked at their life and said that this just sucks. And how they worked through that, how they came through that, and what lessons we can learn from these historical people found in the Bible, and how we can learn to look to God and look to a Jesus-based life to change those circumstances, to work through those circumstances. What do we do as Christians when life sucks? So today I want to take a look at a guy named Moses, and you may have heard about Moses before. You may have heard about Moses and the Egyptians and the Hebrews and slavery. In fact, there is especially in Christian circles and even extending out of the Christian pop culture, about 15 years ago, there is one movie, I might as well just put it on the screen and just walked off stage. It's called The Prince of Egypt. Who's ever seen it before? If you haven't, you can check it out, kind of get the Cole's Notes, after we're done here. Really, The Prince of Egypt is like the Space Jam of Christian movies. Not the second Space Jam, it's actually good. And it's this great example. It's not necessarily perfectly biblical. Not everything's dead on with the Bible, but it's a pretty good example of the story we're gonna talk through as far as a narrative. You may have seen that before, but I wanna talk to you about kind of Moses' perspective in this, go a little bit deeper. But it starts off in this story, the Hebrews, God's chosen people, the Israelites, they are under oppression from the Egyptians. They are under slavery. And this is like not just slavery, it is aggressive, awful, oppressive, vicious slavery. They were being used and abused, and they were being used to build the Egyptian empire. And they were really just being mistreated across the board. They were seen as less than human. They were seen as others. They weren't just seen as humans who happened to be slaves. They were seen as some type of animal that wasn't valued enough to be treated with any dignity, but they could move a stone, they could lift a hammer, and so they needed to be whipped like a horse or like cattle in order to do what was necessary. It's really a horrible life. I can't imagine living under those pretenses, what that would be like. But this was the reality for every single Israelite, every single Hebrew. And at the time when Moses was born, they were starting to grow in number. So they were growing like crazy. They were repopulating. They would have more and more kids. And the Egyptians would see this and they started to become concerned. They're like, man, these Hebrews, these Israelites, they really could start to overpopulate. And next thing you know, they could have like a big revolt and they could turn on us. And next thing you know, there's a coup. And next thing you know, we're their slaves. So, we can't let that happen. So the Pharaoh, the king at the time, decides, okay, we got to do something about that. And he's, again, vicious, didn't see them as humans. He put out a decree, put out an order to his soldiers to throw every baby boy into the Nile River, to murder babies, which is one of the most vicious and awful things that we can think of in humanity. One of the most vile ways that you could do population control, let alone just treat another human. Innocent babies thrown into the Nile. And you can imagine if you were a mom, if you were a dad, how heartbreaking that would be, how scared you would be as they go door to door looking for kids, taking your neighbor's kids. And I got to do something. That's what you start thinking, like, I got to do something about this. I can't really fight back. That's not going to go well. We'll all end up dead. What do I do? And Moses' mom decides to kind of at the last resort, the last possible thing, that Hail Mary pass, puts baby Moses in this papyrus wicker basket. Puts him in the Nile River, which is it's a river. Like, I don't even want to put a kid in the North Saskatchewan River. This one had crocodiles and stuff like that. It's not safe, but it was safer than the certain death that was coming for her baby, coming for Moses. So she puts him in there and floats him away, hoping, praying that God would protect him and do something about the circumstances. And by chance, lightning strikes. And baby Moses, in the papyrus basket is found not just by anyone. He navigates through the reeds and the crocodiles and all the things that could and probably would kill anybody, let alone a baby, and finds himself at the palace where Pharaoh, the king's daughter, picks him up and is like, hey, that's a cute baby. I think I'll keep it. Clearly there was much less stringent adoption laws back then, but she picked him up and he became from rags to riches, from certain death to royalty in a heartbeat. And he ends up being raised as royalty, raised in the palace, grows up rich, grows up with authority, grows up with virtue, grows up with the respect of people. But you would think he would always have a little bit. There'd be whispers, right? Like, maybe they didn't know. Maybe there's a lot of questions as to whether or not the Hebrews and the Egyptians at that time would have really looked super ethnically different, but there would have been some whispers and some knowledge. You don't just all of a sudden not be pregnant, not show it all, and then have like a 2-month-old baby. And they would have figured out somehow, as rumors and truths and secrets start to through the grapevine, that this wasn't Pharaoh's daughter's baby. In fact, he should be a slave. He escaped. We don't know that, but you would imagine that there would be some of that. And as Moses grew up, that's kind of what he would have lived with. Yeah, he had authority, but there was definitely some whispers about who he was and what that meant. So when we look at this story, we look in the second book of the Bible, second book of what is called the Old Testament, and it's called Exodus. And in Exodus, we catch up with Moses, and he has just walked up to one of the Egyptian people, absolutely beating the living snot out of a Hebrew guy. Like just treating him like garbage and beating him within an inch of his life. At this point, Moses would have been aware that he is also from that background. And it says in verse 11 in chapter 2, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, buried him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Oof. Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. And when Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. Lesson here, guys, you want to date a girl, save them from evil shepherds. Just that straightforward. I don't know how many there are out there, let alone shepherds, and I don't know what makes a shepherd evil, but here they were. And Moses was heroic, saved the day. Coming out of that, Moses' life kind of gets more chill. You know, it's pretty extreme. You go from kind of like the baby being threatened to be murdered, drowned in a river, to royalty. So all of a sudden you actually killed someone defending somebody who was being abused, but now you're running from your family. Now your life is in this other sense of chaos, settles into this new space. While your family has literally put out word for you that if you ever return, you're to be killed. No Moses is allowed on the door entering Egypt. You're known, your legacy, your legend. It's not good. Anyone you've ever loved, anyone who's ever loved you, anyone who's ever treated you with any sense of respect, now they hate you. So he goes off to this space and he ends up marrying one of these girls that he saved from these evil shepherds, which is kind of a funny way of looking at it. But he's faced with this situation as this happens. He has to live day to day with the realities of his life. And as he would have looked back on his circumstances through his childhood up to this moment, there's all sorts of things. He lived in royalty for sure, but his life was actually very difficult. Just because you come from money, just because you come from affluence, doesn't mean you don't face significant hardship. Sometimes when we're in a place where we're not feeling affluent or where money is tight, we look at people with money and we don't think, listen, they don't have money stress like we do or like other people do. But there is hardship and struggle and relationship issues and pain and suffering for everyone, no matter what their socioeconomic status is. There's times where life sucks for all those, and Moses is an example of this. Here's a few thoughts. Moses was adopted, and you can only imagine, especially as you look through and hear the stories of people who have been adopted. Maybe you've been adopted, and you felt this in your life. I know I have friends who have been adopted, and they love their adopted families, but they're constantly dealing with this sense of, why was I abandoned by my parents? Even when those situations weren't just abandonment, like they were given because it was a better life, a better situation. It was the hardest thing those parents, biological parents, may have ever done. And they know that, and they're in a great situation, but there's that deep-seated pain of, I'm not enough, I wasn't enough. And that's heartbreaking. Moses, like he would have had that in his life, he would have known that he wasn't from the palace, and he would have had to wrestle with, who am I, and how do I fit in here? Because I sure don't feel like I fit in. He would have had to deal with all those whispers behind his back when he's growing up, like, yeah, you're one of us, but you're really not. That would have been the first chirp from his friends, from his family, from his brothers, his sisters, his cousins. You're not really one of us. You're adopted. And now he's done this thing. He has to live with this reality that he killed someone, even if it was out of what felt like justice to save somebody. But he has to live with the guilt that he's known in that place as a traitor and a murderer, as a coward, as someone who's not just been exiled, but somebody who's run away, who is fearful, who lives and lets fear run his life. And now he's exiled and gone alone without any history from his previous life. Imagine the loneliness that you would feel in that moment. Imagine how Moses is feeling there as now he's married, now he's got a life, he's a shepherd, he's dealing with animals. It kind of sounds just more relaxed. The pace has certainly changed. It feels like it's like moving from New York City, working on the stock market, to living in a Hallmark movie. Like the pace is just small town, brutally slow, but it must have been nice. But he had to live with the realities of who he was, who he'd been, and how he'd been defined by his circumstances, by his life choices, by his sins. His life sucked. And it just seemed to keep getting worse and worse. So what about you? Have you ever felt similar to that? Probably not in this exact same situation, but really, do you ever feel like you don't fit in? Do you ever feel like maybe you don't have close relationships? You have friends, but you don't have close friendships. You've been longing for that relationship, that group of people, or that one best friend who you can tell everything to. Or maybe you were, like I said, actually adopted, and you've been struggling with those hard questions about who am I? Why did this happen? Am I enough? You love your family, but it's just like you have these hard realities that you have to wrestle with about abandonment, or just who your family was and why you couldn't be with them. And my heart goes out to you if you're walking through that. Maybe you've made mistakes in the past. You've sinned, you've lied, you've cheated, you've broken other people's hearts. You feel guilty, you've stolen, you've stabbed people in the back, you've been shamefully sinful in some way, and you feel like you're defined by that, and maybe other people define you as that, and you feel like you'll never escape the mistakes of your past. You'll always be defined by that one thing, those couple of things, those words you said, or those actions you took. Or you'll be defined by the actions of others, the words that were spoken to you. You can't escape the mess that you are living in or that you made for yourself. And your life sucks. You're trying to run away, avoiding your past and avoiding your future at the same time. We find ourselves so often crippled by our insecurity. We find ourselves so often crippled by our anxiety. In the worst way, it holds us back in life. And I think a lot of that is because we look at people who we want to be like, people that we look at as successful. We see these people that we're like, that lady, that girl, that guy, they're heroic. They're somebody who did great things. They're people that saved lives. They're people that did great business deals. They made great businesses. There's just these people that are leaders that we think that's the type. If only I could tap into that. If only I could be a little bit like that person. If only I wasn't me. And we see these people rise up and achieve more in life than we could ever imagine, in school, in their education, in their career, in their love life, in their faith. I'm not good enough. So why can't I be more like them? And when we have the chance to step up, when God cracks the door open for us, we falter and we look at ourselves and we say, no, not me. My life sucks. I'll just screw it up. Not me. You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what I'm capable of. It's just better if I just stay in my lane. Have you been there? I know I have. And it's really hard to get past. Sometimes the person that's the most in our way is ourselves. So eventually Moses, he marries this young lady. He has this decent life, and he's out just kind of killing time, having that passive lifestyle, and he's out shepherding, and he comes across randomly, and I don't think this happens in day-to-day life very often, a bush that's on fire in the wilderness. But this bush isn't like smoldering up and breaking up and actually combusting like normal trees and bushes do when they're on fire. The fire, it just keeps burning. There's something unique about it, but the most unique thing about this fire was that it called out his name. Fairly unusual. It called out to Moses. And we catch up with Moses in Exodus 3, verses 5 to 12. And it's God in the fire. He says, do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because they're slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the city of the Israelites has reached me. The cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I have seen the way of the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on the mountain. And God said, I will be with you. Moses has, in this moment, probably the scariest thought he's had to ever face. God, who generally gets his way, is telling him he needs to go back home. He had to go and face his past. Moses has to go and come face to face, not just with the impossible reality and request of a slave driver and a king in Pharaoh, a family member, to say, hey, you know all your slaves that are like really driving your economy here are making you the greatest empire the world at the time has ever known? Yeah, you gotta let them go. It might hurt your GDP a little bit, but I think you should let them go. You might lose a few bucks. You might get overtaken by another nation. You might lose your world power status, but my God told me that you're gonna let them go. But he has to go back and come face to face with every person, every look as he walks through the streets. It's Moses. He's the guy that did this. He's the one that did this. Remember this? Remember him? He's a coward. He ran away. All the whispers, all the things people would say, and all the things that he would just fabricate in the anxiety of his own mind that they would be saying about him. He has to not only come face to face with what he has done, but he has to go face to face with every person that he's ever hurt or that has ever looked at him negatively. He has to run back and face everything that he was running from. He had to face his circumstances and move forward. They knew who he was: a murderer, a Hebrew, a coward, a fraud. He's so insecure that it actually says in Scripture that he later argues with God, saying, I'm not a good enough communicator. I kind of stutter a little bit. I'm slow to speak. He's looking for every reason why God should choose somebody else. And on paper, yeah, he's not the person that you would probably choose. You're probably looking for somebody who's just like a warrior, who's going to just march in there confident and just get right in Pharaoh's face. Make a business deal, close it, get out, throw the jacket over his shoulder, and walk out. You got this meek person who doesn't even feel like they're strong enough to stay in the circumstances, to face the music of their reality. They ran away, and apparently he can't even talk that good, but he's the one that we want communicating the terms of the deal. But God tells him, again, I will be with you. I will be with you. In your scary situation, in the conversations you don't want to have when you come face to face with the scariest moments of your life, the things that you don't think you can get past, when you look Pharaoh in the eyes and you say, let my people go, I will be with you. Even though you're scared, I will be with you. Even though you don't really know how it's going to go, even though you're pretty sure the circumstances are not something you can overcome and you're going to probably end up dead, I will be with you. So he goes to Egypt against his will, more or less, but he obeys God and he goes before Pharaoh and he says, hey man, let him go. And he's obviously not met with the most warm welcome. He's not met with hugs and welcome backs and kisses on the forehead, especially because he's kind of asking for the main driver of the economy to leave. And Pharaoh says, no. But he mentions that every time he says no, that God's going to send another plague, and he does. There's 10 plagues that come to try and force the hand of Pharaoh to say, hey, you might not want to mess with this God guy. He's got some power, and these people, he's not a big fan of oppression. He's not a big fan of slavery. He's not a big fan of the way that you're treating them, and he wants them gone. This isn't just a Moses thing. This is a God thing. And so he sends plagues, water into blood, frogs, lice, flies, dead animals, boils, thunderstorms, and hail of fire, locusts, 3 days of darkness, and the last one after Pharaoh just is like, nah, that wasn't enough. Hail of fire, what's that? Nothing. Doesn't scare me at all. If there was hail of fire right now, I would freak right out. The moment the sky starts hailing fire, Jeff is out of here. Whatever God wants, yep, whenever you want it. And I think most rational people would be the same, but Pharaoh's hard-nosed, and he said, no, I'm not going to do that, and he really won't move. Then Moses goes to him and says, hey, listen, this is the last one, and this one's bad, so please just listen. Let us go. That night, the firstborn child of every home was going to pass away. And that plague came, and the next morning there was this massive cry in all of Egypt as they woke up and the kids had passed away. It was the last thing God wanted. It was the last thing. It was the last resort. But the oppression of these people, the pain, he had heard the cry of the Israelites, and he needed to act. And so after that, overcome with grief, Pharaoh is like, yeah, okay, enough. Go, get out of here. Don't even look at me. So then they go. And they're moving an entire nation. This isn't like just like you and your family getting in the old station wagon and going to Banff. We're talking about moving old people, crippled people, children. Have you ever tried to walk with like a kid through West Edmonton Mall, let alone an entire nation of them through the desert? Not easy. And they had to do this with this entire nation and move them. And eventually they're free, but they're working through this grind into freedom, into this promised land. And they're heading up, and all of a sudden they come over this cliff, and there's just this massive ocean. They don't got Google Maps. They didn't know this was coming. They'd never seen this before. And there's this ocean, the Red Sea, in front of them. And they're just like, well, what are we doing? Well, I guess we got to turn back. And they look behind them, and all of a sudden, Pharaoh had a change of heart. He thought about his economy. He thought about what all had happened, and he's ticked right off, and he wants to bring back the slaves, probably treat them worse than ever and make an example out of them, and murder a good chunk of them in front of them just to show how strong he was, so they would never consider this again. So on one side, they're faced by certain death and certain slavery, and on the other side, they have a sea in front of them, and they're not great swimmers. And it looks like they're in trouble. And Moses at this point is actually getting chirped by his own people. Imagine you're in this situation, it's like, this is just my life. This happens to me all the time. I never knew my parents. I didn't get to have a normal childhood. And I just picture him thinking like, man, like my life is garbage. Why me? I just wanted to have a normal life, and here I'm born in royalty, but then like I'm part of this slave group, and then I'm also like I tried to save someone, but then I'm cast out, and I had a happy life. I was fine. I didn't need to deal with anything. I could have just lived for another 40 years, whatever, and had a nice life with my wife. But no, God had to send me back here, and I had to deal with this. I had to deliver the bad news. I had to use talk. I'm not even a good talker, and now I actually listened, and I thought it was working out. And now everyone's gonna die in front of me or be brought into slavery. I am the end of this. My people are going to be obliterated and wiped off the face of the planet because I couldn't lead them well enough. God, why would you do this to me? My life sucks. He's even getting chirped by his own people. They look at him and say, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? You had to bring us here to die. Sounds like a great, nice person to hang out with. But the brokenness, the insecurities, everything that he's ever felt about not being enough would well up. Would well up. But then Moses remembers what God said. I will be with you. We always say around here, God always keeps his promises. He promised Moses in the desert, he said, I will be with you. And here he remembers, I will be with you, and he does not abandon people when he says, I will be with you. And we catch up in Exodus 14:21, as Moses walks up to the sea, the circumstances in front of him that literally are insurmountable, the wall of water that no one can swim past. This isn't like Alberta Beach or Sylvan Lake. This is an ocean, as far as the eye can see, and then that times 10. It says, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, the army pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar and fire and cloud that he had created to block the Egyptians before, and the Egyptian army, and it threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of the chariot so that they had a difficult time driving. He put those brakes on, and the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The waters flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen. The entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, not one of them survived. They were facing certain death. They were facing an insurmountable task. They were in trouble. They were done. It was over. They were going to be destroyed. But Moses remembered, in the midst of his insecurity, God said to him, I will be with you. And he stepped out and he put his hand out in an act of faith, an act of obedience, and let God take control of the story. And they walked on the other side, walked through the ocean to the other side, not with mud, not with pools of water, on dry ground. Miraculous. And they were saved in spite of what stood in front of them. So I want to look through 3 things we can learn for times of trouble when life sucks from Moses' story here. The first one is that your past does not define your future when God is involved. Your past doesn't define you when God defines your future. And so no matter what you've walked through, no matter what you're struggling with, no matter what someone has called you, no matter what that identity issue is in your life, the thing that's holding you back from pursuing your dreams, pursuing what God has called you to, or even just having the confidence to follow God and to say, I want to follow Jesus, but I'm not good enough. Whatever is happening, whatever happened in your past, you're saying, I can't do what I want to in my future because I'm not enough. Moses wasn't special. On paper, Moses should have died. Moses should have never risen above anything. He should have never been able to come back from his mistakes. He should have never had any success. He couldn't even barely talk, and yet he does this incredible thing. In spite of all his insecurities, all his weaknesses, all of his mistakes, he still does something that's insurmountably, unbelievably cool, powerful, and world-changing. Something heroic. Even though he didn't believe in himself, he let God show him who he was and work through him. And God will do the same thing in your life. If you put your faith in Jesus, if you make the best decision you could ever make in your entire life, and that's to make Jesus God of your life, to follow him and to pattern your life after him, if you choose to reconnect to that, to realign with what Jesus calls us to be and how to live, it will change everything. It will change the way you live. It will change the way you look at yourself. You will still have made those mistakes. You will still have heard those words, believed those words. But now you don't have to believe and be defined in your own life by them. You can see that through God, not through yourself, but through what Jesus can do with you in spite of your circumstances and your insecurities and your weaknesses, you can do anything that God would call you to. You don't got to get stronger. You don't got to get smarter. You don't got to get more better looking. You don't have to get in better shape. You need to follow Jesus. He calls every last one of us. The other thing is this, is that we can learn that heroes are insecure too. It's okay that you're insecure. It's okay that you don't think that you're the greatest leader, that you don't think that you're the smartest person, the best looking, that you don't feel like you're the most confident, qualified person. God doesn't pick people because they're the most qualified. He picks people because he knows what they're called to, because he designed you, because he created you. He knows your flaws, and he says, I choose you anyways. Don't ever lose that. Don't ever believe the lie that you're not enough, that you're not valuable, that you can't do incredible things. And if someone said that to you, get rid of it. Don't listen. It's lies. It's not true. Stop believing it. Right now, stop believing it. He believed it for too long, and God wants to replace those negative thoughts with truths about you that he speaks, because he is truth. And if he says it, it is true. And that's what should define you. And he says you were beautifully, wonderfully made, that you have a purpose, a good purpose for your life. And that is what you're called to be, what you're defined as. So heroes are insecure, and God doesn't just pick heroes, he makes you a hero through him. The third one is that you can overcome whatever's holding you back. Don't let that thing hold you back any longer. Don't let that mistake, don't let that word, those things you were called, whatever it is, stop letting it hold you back. But what Moses did was, even though he's insecure, when he was called and told that he had to go back to Egypt to do this thing, yeah, God called him to. God made that promise, I will be with you. But it wasn't like he just cantered off. He was like, oh, okay, everything will be great. He was still insecure. He had to push through his insecurity. He had to push through. There was multiple times. It's not like we have to face our insecurity and be like, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough, God. I'm going to have to work through this and trust you one time, and it's all smooth sailing from there. No. Following Jesus is repeatedly putting his calling on our life before the negative things that we define ourselves as, ignoring sin more than once, moving past sin more than once, asking for forgiveness more than once. And we would think that that's cumbersome, that that's going to disqualify us. But the fact is, we are regularly going to make mistakes and feel like we're not good enough. But Jesus stands there and he says, you're forgiven in spite of what you've done, how much you think you've fallen before. I'm here to help you get back up. You've fallen 100 times, 1,000 times. I can't even count anymore how many times I keep falling down from this repetitive sin in my life. And how could someone just waste their time? How could Jesus waste their time, his time, pulling me back up from my sin over and over and over again? And Jesus says, I got all day. I'm not gonna get tired of picking you back up, of embracing you, of reminding you who you are. Exponential forgiveness, unbelievable forgiveness. So whatever's been holding you back, whatever is holding you back, whatever is scaring you, whatever's in the way of the future you have been called to, but you just can't seem to get past it. Your illness, your mental health situation, your family situation, your financial situation, whatever it is, stop letting it hold you back. Maybe on your own you would have been held back from it, but the truth is that that Jesus doesn't break his promises. And just like he did for Moses, just like he promised Moses at that burning bush moment where he said, go and do this thing that seems impossible. He says to you, the same as him, I will be with you. I won't abandon you. When it seems like I have, and there's literally an army behind you and an insurmountable ocean in front of you, it's hopeless. I will be with you. I will find a way where there is no way. I will make a way where you can't see one, where you feel like you're done, you feel like you're trapped, you feel like there's no way out, and life sucks. I will be with you. He's not going to abandon you. He never has. He never will. He never will. You're never alone. He's right there, even when it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes he's just asking us to reach out, to acknowledge that, to take a step of faith, to push past our insecurity, to push past the thing that's been holding us back, and to choose to act as he's called us to. Jesus is calling all of us. So will you answer that call? For anyone here who's never made a decision, the best decision you could ever make to follow Jesus, I want to give you that opportunity right now. And it's as simple. There's no obstacle course. There's no dance you have to do, no paperwork you have to fill out. You don't have to do one of those things where you prove you're not a robot. You just have to pray and to acknowledge Jesus as Lord of your life. And if that's you tonight, or maybe you have been so far from God, you used to believe in Jesus, you used to follow Jesus, but now you're pushing away and you're thinking, man, I want to come back. I don't know if I can. The truth is you can. And so I encourage you, if you're either of those, to pray this along in your heart with me. Jesus, thank you that you died on the cross. Thank you that you are God, that you were 100% God, 100% man. You came to earth and you died for my sins, that you forgive me, and that I'm defined by the identity that you give me, not by what my mistakes were. And God, as I navigate my identity, who I am, what I can do, what you've called me to be, I pray that you would just every day help me to think, to speak, and to act more like you. Be Lord of my life. Help me to be more like you, Jesus. And I thank you for the freedom that comes from what you did for me on the cross. In Jesus' name, amen. If that's you, then I'd love for you to scan the code that's going to be up on the screen, or DM us on Instagram, or come talk to us at the info booth. Don't leave here without telling somebody that you made that great decision to follow Jesus, and congratulations on that as well. The band's going to play a couple of more songs here tonight. We're going to have a prayer team up at the front for the next little bit, kind of spread out. If you have something in your life, maybe it's that thing that we've been just talking about here, and you need prayer, you want to just agree with somebody, or maybe there's something going on, you need healing in your life, you need God to intervene in a situation, please don't leave here tonight without getting prayer from one of our team members up at the front here. But for the rest of us, as we stand, as we pray, as we sing, just take some time to read through the words, to seek Jesus, but remember to reflect on the reality and the truth that you are defined by what he does through you, not by what you've been, not by what you've done. Jesus is standing beside you and he says, I will be with you. Let's stand if you can.